With the defeat at Isandlwana, British forces in Zululand were on the retreat, but the price of victory for the Zulus had been high, with their king Cetshwayo saying that an assegai had been thrust into the belly of the Zulu nation. It had never been Cetshwayo's intention to invade Natal, but to simply fight within the boundaries of the Zulu kingdom. The Battle of Rorke's Drift had been fought against Cetshwayo's command not to attack the British in fortified positions. Despite the Zulu defeat at Rorke's Drift, they found themselves in a good position to defend their homeland. The British government swiftly reacted to the defeat at Isandlwana and rushed 7 regiments of reinforcements to Natal, along with 2 artillery batteries. Chelmsford used the next 2 months to regroup and build a fresh invading force, with the initial intention of relieving Pearson at Eshowe. The first troops arrived at Durban on the 7th of March, and a few days later on the 12th, the British suffered another defeat at the Battle of Intombe. An armed escort of stores under the command of Captain Anderson was marching to Limburg. The convoy struggled badly due to the heavy rains as the roads were bogged. The wagons being shoved most of the way and fearing a Zulu attack, Major Charles Tucker sent an order to Anderson to reach Limburg that night at any cost. The company commander took this literally and abandoned the wagons and returned to Limburg. When Anderson reached Limburg without the supplies, Tucker was aghast and sent Captain David Moriarty and 106 men to bring in the convoy. By the time the Moriarty party reached Mayor's Drift, the river had risen. A camp was established on the Limburg side, and the men began to lash a raft of planks and barrels together with rope. A few men at the time were ferried across, except for a party of 35 commanded by Lieutenant Lindrop. On the far side, Moriarty and the rest of the party went to recover the wagons, but found that most had been emptied by looters. It took until around noon on the 11th of March to get all the wagons to the north bank of the river, and by that time the local Zulu leader gathered about 800 men and awaited for the perfect opportunity to strike. On the night of the 11th of March 1879, 2 sentries were stationed 20 yards from the laager, but the rising ground in front of them limited their line of sight. At 3:30 a.m. on the 12th of March, a shot was heard close to the camp. The men returned to their beds after Moriarty decided that it was of no consequence. An hour and a half later, a sentry on the far bank saw, through a clearing in the mist, a huge mass of Zulus advancing silently on the camp. Warning shots were fired, and the camp rushed to defend themselves. Moriarty charged out of his tent with his revolver at the ready and killed 3 Zulus before being shot and stabbed from an assegai. He was said to have shouted as he fell, "Fire away, boys, death or glory, I'm done." A few of his companions managed to put up a resistance, and many were cut down. Survivors fled into the river, hoping to be washed to the far bank. The troops on the far bank provided as much covering fire as possible. Upon what survivors they could see reaching the Limburg side of the river, Lieutenant Henry Hollingworth Howard, Moriarty's second in command, gave the order to withdraw as several hundred Zulus were crossing the river. No sooner had he done this, he grabbed the first horse he spotted and fled, abandoning his men. Survivors were left under the command of Sergeant Anthony Booth, who formed the men into a retreating square. For 3 miles the Zulus pursued the group of around 40 survivors. Whenever they drew close, Booth's men delivered a volley which dispersed their pursuers. 4 men who split from the group to take a shortcut to Limburg were overtaken and killed. The others made it to Raby's farm, around 2 miles from Limburg, where the Zulus broke off their pursuit. The wagons at the lager were looted, and all the ammunition and supplies were carried off by the Zulus or destroyed. For his heroic action, Booth was later awarded the Victoria Cross. Chelmsford ordered Sir Evelyn Wood's northern column to attack the Zulu stronghold in Hallowbane. Lieutenant Colonel Buller led the attack on Hallowbane on the 28th of March. However, as the main Zulu army of 20,000 men approached to help their besieged tribesmen, the British force began a retreat, which turned into a rout, and were pursued by 1,000 Zulus, who inflicted some 225 casualties on the British force. The day after the defeat at the Battle of Hallowbane, Evelyn Wood's troops would come under attack by a force of around 20,000 Zulus. The British were dug in on the Cambulla Hill. Ketchswear ordered the Zulu army not to engage this fortified position, but to lure the British out. Buoyed on by recent victories, the Zulu king's orders were ignored. The Zulus launched waves of attack upon the British camp, but were beaten back by heavy firepower. Zulu losses were around 2,000 killed, but the worst of all was that the Zulu warriors lost their belief that they could win this war. While Wood's column was thus engaged, Chelmsford's column was marching to Esho. On the 2nd of April his force was attacked en route, but the Zulus were repulsed. Their losses were heavy, estimated at 1,200, but the British suffered only 2 dead and 52 wounded, and the next day they relieved Pearson's men. They evacuated Esho on the 5th of April, after which the Zulu forces burned it down. The war with the Zulus was meant to be a swift campaign, in which Lord Chelmsford would enhance his political prestige at home, but after a few months into the campaign, all Chelmsford had to show was minor victories and a list of humiliating defeats. Upon receiving news of these defeats, and fearing further humiliation, the British government dispatched Sir Garnet Wolseley to replace Chelmsford. With his career and reputation at stake, Chelmsford needed a decisive victory and would now have to act quickly.